Here, Babylonian astronomy, Hindu mathematics and Chinese science were transmitted to Europe by Arab humanists. It was one of the great multicultural epochs of all time. If one could combine Arabic faith and Jewish intelligence, said one, with an Iraqi education, Christian conduct, Greek knowledge, Indian mysticism, and a Sufi way of life, this would be the perfection of humanity. That dream still stands as one of the greatest of all declarations of faith in an international civilization. Now there comes the event on which the whole course of modern Western history rests. An event which opened unimaginable mental horizons and brought undreamed-of wealth flowing back to Europe, renewing and transforming the spiritual empire of Rome, gilding its roofs with Aztec gold. The conquest of the New World. From Mexico to the Andes, the Europeans appropriated the almost limitless resources of the New World, studying its landscape with the churches of Christian gods. The conquest was accompanied by a genocide unparalleled in history. In the century after Columbus, over 2/3 of the native population of the Americas died through disease and violence. Perhaps as many as 50 million people. Columbus wrote to the Queen of Spain, "Our European civilization will bring light to the natives in their darkness. But for ourselves, we will gain gold. And with gold, we will be able to do what we want in the world." The discovery of the New World shifted the center of gravity of the West, away from its old heartland in the Mediterranean, to the seaboard of northwestern Europe, to nations like Holland and England, Protestant and capitalist. Here in Malden, a small port on the east coast of England, is a symbol of that age, the intact library of a 17th century scholar, Thomas Plume, who endowed the professorship of astronomy at Cambridge. His 7,000 books enable us to step back into the intellectual world of this new civilization of the West at the point of its rise to world domination. Here are translations of Greek and Arabic science. Here's Galileo's vision of the cosmos. Descartes anatomizing the marvels of the human body. But the key figure in the new learning was Francis Bacon. For Bacon saw how science and technology would be used in the future to subdue the other peoples of the planet and ultimately to conquer nature itself. It's Bacon who now appears the prophet of our age and the quintessential Western scientist. This new science, new learning, had fateful implications for the future, as Bacon himself understood. For if it were true, as Bacon said, that henceforth in human affairs what was most useful in practice would also be most correct in theory, then truth itself could be defined in terms of utility, usefulness, not in terms of religion and morals. And so man could become a law unto himself, as Bacon said, and depend no more on God. It's one of the founding ideas behind our modern Western scientific civilization, which would go out and exploit and subdue the entire world in the name of that new science.
Now the workings of the human body would give up their secrets. The stars and planets could be measured. The world itself subjected to Western definitions of time and space. Mapped on a meridian based on Greenwich. And when the Jesuits first showed the Chinese a map of the whole world, they were taken aback by the knowledge of these so-called barbarians. Up till then, said one, they'd printed maps of the world in which China was all. But when they saw the world so large, and China only a corner of it, they knew in truth that their world had changed. It was industrial revolution which now enabled the small-scale societies of Northern Europe to take a world lead in trade. And this happened first in Britain. Hitherto, most of the great technological advances in history had come from Asia. But now the West leapt ahead, its mobile, individualistic populations becoming predominantly city dwellers in a few generations. The effects on human beings and the environment are still being counted. The industrial city has now spread across the landscape of the world, from the plains of India to the Yellow River in China. But it began here in Manchester. Its great buildings, like the Town Hall from the 1860s, stand as monuments to the ideals of that new civilization. The statues in the entrance are not to poets or gods, but to men of science, Joule, Dalton, and Rutherford, who split the atom here for the first time. The 19th century badge of the city was the busy bee. Its motto, through prudence and hard work, the ideals of the new age. Foreign visitors were deeply impressed by this heroic materialism. This is an extraordinarily talented people, said a Chinese diplomat. How can we continue to call them barbarians? For they have taken on the mantle of civilization. On the ceilings are the emblems of virtually all the countries in the world, countries under the trading dominion of the British Empire, the greatest the world had ever seen. Among them, the ancient civilizations of India, China, and Japan, all now connected by this new form of international culture, manufacturing capitalism.
The first cities of the great civilizations in India and China and the Near East had all been in some sense sacred enclosures, but these were emphatically places where money was to be made by hard work. The problems that they encountered in creating these industrial cities we're now familiar with all over the world. Population, poverty, health, housing, social order, democracy, and the ways in which they attempted to solve them here, the amenities which they thought were necessary for a civilized city life, have now become the blueprint for the modern city.
But the Victorians differed from us in one important respect, that they were optimists about the role of the city as an ordering and liberating force in human affairs.
It's early summer in Washington, D.C. The leader of the modern West prepares to celebrate victory in the Gulf War of 1991. All around, Egyptian obelisks, Greek and Roman temples proclaim that the United States is the inheritor of the legacy not only of Europe, but of Greece and Rome and Egypt too. Never in history has so much power resided in the hands of one nation. The ideals of this new order are enshrined in marble all around. They're noble ideals. The Lincoln Memorial, modelled on the Parthenon in Athens, commemorates one who through a brutal civil war held on to the ideals of the European Enlightenment, the French and American revolutions. The belief that all are born equal, with equal rights to freedom and happiness. To walk this sacred space is to be reminded too that there are many ways of seeing history. That history is ever changing, never definitive, never black and white, and usually with right and wrong on both sides. And each generation must reinterpret history in the life of the nation just as in the life of the individual. In this way, like the pilgrims at the memorial to the Vietnam War, each of us tries to come to terms with our victories and our defeats, our wrongdoing and our suffering, our collective myths and our most cherished ideals.
There we go. Well, yeah, but they still have... Okay. You want to put the helmet on? Good. Now, if you were flying along and all of a sudden you saw a bad guy, well, all you have to do is basically look at him and you can shoot him.
In our time, the astonishing growth of technology and communications has seen the global village arrive. As a world ideology, our own liberal democratic capitalism would seem to have no rival.
And yet, throughout the countries of the rich West, there's a growing and profound disquiet. A feeling that the Western way of life itself is no longer supportable morally or practically because of pollution, environmental destruction, and the continuing exploitation of the mass of humanity. If that disquiet is justified, which surely it is, then the great question for the next generation is simple. Are the values of the West alone enough to guarantee the continuing health of the planet? Those values, as we've seen, are writ large in our history. Individualistic, competitive, acquisitive, always pushing outwards, never happy in an empty room, as Pascal said. And yet it's the bearers of that vision of life, the rulers of the West, who hold in their hands the future of the planet. It feels at this moment as if the West, at the very moment of its triumph, has reached that point which comes to all civilizations, when, if they're not to decline,